at Superior Ag. We're here to talk about a little bit refining high yield practices in corn. With me today I've got Dr. Dan Quinn, Purdue University, corn extension. Anybody want to, any boiler makers in the room here? Yeah, boiler up, there we go. So, but that counts. You've been to school there now. So we're going to turn it over. Dan, go ahead and take it away.
You can hear me. I've got wires going everywhere here, so bear with me. But yeah, one good evening. I told the last group that there was a football talk earlier. At Purdue we like to skip football season. I'm at Purdue and just move right to basketball season if we could. So, but I want to talk a little bit about. We're going to kind of bounce around a little bit with some of the data that we have. Kind of go down some fungicide routes, some fertility routes as well, and we're going to share just some different data from some different trials that we've been doing around the state of Indiana. But I do want to start out just when you think about high yield management of corn or just managing corn in general. I like to share this figure that I share a lot in a lot of talks that I give, just helping you understand or giving some perspective in terms of that corn yield is not made in one day, right? It's made throughout the entire season. It's made in different components. Corn can tolerate stress better than in some stages than others. But the main idea is that corn yield is really an entire life cycle aspect for that plant. So we have to kind of manage it in different ways and target these different components of corn with the way we manage it throughout the entire season. So it starts with, number of plants per acre, germination and emergence. You think about planting, think about depth, the uniformity of emergence, the quickness of emergence. There's a lot of important aspects in just getting that corn into the ground and getting it out of the ground in a timely fashion. Then we move to stand establishment. Big thing with corn that I always stress that just because it came out of the ground doesn't mean it's in good shape. Corn has to go through some transition periods, largely with its root system. It starts off with relying on the seed, and then it says, hey, I can't rely on the seed anymore. I need to rely on my root system. So I have a lot of farmers that will call about V2, V3 corn and say, my corn looked great 2 weeks ago, now it looks like crap. A big piece of that is actually that transition and that root system of corn. We talk about vegetative growth. That's when ear size is being determined. You can't see the ears at that point in time. If you look real closely, you can find them. But at that point in time, that rapid growth phase, that's when ear size is being determined. That potential kernel number. Think about rows around on an ear. You think about the length of an ear as well. Both of those are being determined. Rows around is a little bit shorter, a little bit earlier window, more genetically controlled. Ear length is a little bit longer window. It's going to be a little bit more influenced by stress and management. But both stress and management can influence both rows around and ear length. And then pollination, you think about R1 and silking in corn, just how sensitive corn is at pollination. It's also when we see the highest yield losses per day from individual stresses at that stage. Corn is in some ways a machine at that growth stage, but also very sensitive. Consecutive cloudy days can influence corn yield at that point in time. So ear size is potential kernel numbers, pollination actual kernel numbers. So the most critical period, the most critical growth stage for corn is going to be at pollination. And then lastly, we'll touch on this quite a bit today, is just grain fill in corn, the importance of grain fill. How do we manage grain fill in corn? And just understanding that if we can manage it or extend that grain fill, how does that influence kernel weight and kernel size? Those are two big aspects that can swing yield one way or the other as well, and the importance of grain fill. So we'll touch a lot on that. So largely what we'll kind of go through today is just different management practices, different tools that we can use and data that we have that shows just different practices at each one of these kind of time points throughout the season. This is some of the work that we've been doing across Indiana, working on something like Zyway. Zyway LFR is a systemic fungicide. It's a fungicide the plant actually takes up, and it's a fungicide that we see actually kind of hang around for quite a while. We've done some work with Zyway for the last 4 years or so. What's been kind of interesting about working with this product is that it actually hangs around all the way into early reproductive stages. So we've seen residue flutriafol in the leaf tissue all the way from R2 to R3 when we've looked at it in some of our trials. It's also flexible in the way it's applied. It's applied through the planter typically, but it's just another tool to use from a disease control standpoint. This is some yield data over here. Red box is going to be banded. That's 2x2 or 2x0 applications. Blue boxes are in furrow. Zyway LFR, that specific formulation is no longer labeled for in furrow. It was at the time that we started this study. In furrow, we see yield benefits, but we also see quite a few yield negatives. That's why it's also moved away from that application. But banded, that 2x0 or 2x2, largely 2x2 application, about 7.8 bushel. Largely, we see a lot of the yield responses more in the southern half of the state. It does a really good job with gray leaf spot, but does have small control with stuff like tar spot. This is some of the disease severity data that we found. This is just with this product. That's it. All the way at R5. So beginning dent, we looked at leaf disease severity on the ear leaf, and we're still seeing some control in relation to no Zyway applied. So again, just kind of a fungicide that can be used, and what's interesting about it is just how long that activity maintains in that plant. Good. Yep.
So we're going to switch gears just a little bit with this here because not everybody's got all the capabilities on their planter. Maybe not everybody's got 2x2 on their planter, or not everybody has in-furrow applications on their planter, but they're still wanting to increase that plant health and kind of try to protect us out there in that for northern corn leaf blight. We talked about gray leaf spot, some of the big two that Zyway picks up out there. So there is some other option. How many guys post-spray their corn? I think pretty much everybody in the room post-sprays their corn, right? So when you start looking at post-spray applications, there's a couple different things you can look at from a fungicide standpoint. Maybe even get a little suppression and some crown rot out there with certain products. But the key thing to take away when we start looking at a V5 application, I think we got to look at products that got two modes of action today. As we move forward, in the past, there's several guys we were using some just single mode of action, some strobillions. If you start looking at a separation out there in the field today, when we look at them, especially this year, as high as the northern corn leaf blight disease was early on, we were seeing a little more breakthrough just of the single strobillion strains of fungicide. Whereas with the, whether it's prothenoconazole or other dual modes of action, we were seeing a little better control. On average, looking at a lot of different sites with whether it's Pertigum YLD, Stratego YLD, or some other products with dual modes of action, you're looking at about 6.9 bushel putting that in at V5 application with your herbicide pass. The other thing that would allow you to do at V5, if you're out there, you're making an application, we're just going to stay at the top one here. There is some other nutrients that you can influence at that point in time at your V5 application. So looking at zinc, manganese, and boron, they're usually some of the most, on your micronutrient standpoint there, most efficient product, the most efficient in your samples that we get back in our tissue samples. So looking at that there at V4, V5 applications, roughly 6 bushel difference when we're putting those products in at V5. So I'm going to switch gears back with.
So I'm going to touch a little bit on fertility work that we've been doing as well. One aspect is that we started to pay a lot more attention to is potassium in corn. This has been an interesting trial just to learn more about potassium management in corn. What we've done at Purdue is actually we have some specific locations that we purposely keep really low in K so that we can understand responses and crop responses. And if you look at this picture here, that's severe deficiency of K. So this data is going to be kind of worst case scenario, but I do think there's some things we can learn from it. This site, southeast Indiana, Jennings County, these soils are notorious for being difficult with potassium, difficult to build those soils with potassium. In this site, you look at the soil test results, so these are in parts per million, so about 26 to 31 parts per million. That's very low. You would never want any of your fields to be that low of a level. But just looking at, first, we'll just look at just broadcast potash response. And this is spring potash application. I think it was a few weeks before planting that we put that potash on. You look at 0 pounds per acre of potash and look at the overall yields at these low of soil test levels with no potash applied. Yield was 33 bushel at that site. Right? That's really low. That is severe case scenario of corn. So just seeing how deficient corn can get and how much of a yield reduction can happen with no potassium applied. You look at the potash response here, we go from 0 to 300 pounds per acre of potash. And when we got up to really 225 and 300 pounds of potash, we were starting to see that leveling off of that yield response. So about 237 and 232 at those rates. So just looking at potash from this study, going from 0 all the way up to 225 or 300, we saw about a 200 bushel response. It's not many times I can pencil down that I had a 200 bushel response to a treatment, but just reiterating the importance of potassium. Again, this is worst case scenario, but also the fact that if we reach up to adequate potassium levels just with potash, we can see pretty significant yield bumps. Another aspect of this study is also looking at in-furrow potassium. That was another piece that we wanted to add. This is in-furrow potassium over here, so the no and yes on this table. That potassium is potassium nitrate, potassium sulfate, and it was actually some more potash as well. But very low rates, so I think about 2 pounds of potassium in total per acre from that application, but more targeted application on the seed. Looking at no potash applied, so again, worst case scenario where I have severely deficient plants, we saw about a 19 bushel response just from that small amount of potassium applied in furrow. But what was interesting is that yield increase actually tracked across all of these broadcast potash rates. It decreased some, but actually all the way up until 300 pounds of potash applied in the spring, we're still seeing about a 14 bushel response to that in-furrow targeted application of potassium. So it's kind of a system piece, especially in these soils. You know, these soils here in this location are just notorious for being challenging with K. We are expanding this trial this year. We're also doing it on fields that are not this severe deficient in K to see if that holds true as well. But we have seen some visual responses as well from this year from the in-furrow application. But again, reiterating the importance of potassium in maintaining K levels in the soil, and then also additional management practices of something like in-furrow K on these more challenging soils.
So I know most of you guys are more familiar with pounds per acre when we talk about pounds. So this 26 would be equivalent to 52 pounds of potash. So pretty low. Obviously this is, you know, the trial that they're utilizing, but when you guys understand it. So the good thing to take away from that, I think, is obviously there's all been acres that you guys have been out, you picked up, or you know, the last couple of years, or maybe the economics was a little tough the last few years and you say, God, I don't know if I can put any potash on, or you skipped a year of fertilizer. And I think the positive thing to look at is, though, if we make amendments and we fertilize every crop with 150 or 200 pounds or whatever that number may be of potash, and you guys don't have 26-pound potash levels, if you fertilize and make that amendment to that crop every year, I think, you know, we're going to be in good shape. Whether we have built to that 300-pound level of potash levels, that may not be as critical as making sure that you actually fertilize every crop at this point. So keep that in mind. Also, if you are going to make some adjustments to your potassium out there, and maybe you say, well, I'm going to cut back from 200 pounds to 150 pounds this year. If that's the case, and hey, oh, by the way, I may be thinking about using an in-furrow potassium type product. Well, in the past, a lot of guys use 10-34-0. What is 10-34-0 missing? If you did an in-furrow, what's it missing? Potash, right? So what about some of the products that we offer today, the 725-5, the 520-7, the 821-5? Those are all have potassium in them. Some of them have potassium acetate, some are potassium hydroxide. The key takeaway on part of that is to make sure that we have potassium at that early stages on corn, because when you look at a ratio on corn in that early growth stages from emergence to about V5, a corn plant is pretty much a 1-to-1 ratio from nitrogen and potassium both. It is very, very close. So if you're taking up about 4 to 5 pounds up to about V5, that's about what you're taking up in potassium as well. It's almost 1-to-1 ratio on P to K there.
Yep. I did want to, I didn't bring any of this data with me, but we've been doing a lot of work. It's really starting on potassium influence on nitrogen rate response in corn. So that's another big piece of potassium, is just how it interacts and behaves with nitrogen. We actually see that the optimum N rate, so the N rate response of corn, will change with either adequate or deficient potassium. So being low in potassium can have yield impacts both from a crop standpoint, but also from a nitrogen rate response or a nitrogen response standpoint as well. So that's another piece that we've been diving into. So I'm going to talk a little bit now on the back end of the season, talking about grain fill in corn. We talked a lot about, starter applications, early season, mid-season applications, some fertility. But I did want to touch on largely grain fill and also grain fill duration in corn. And there's actually some things we can look at in terms of management standpoints to how to influence that. One thing that we largely looked at was fungicide, so foliar fungicide. We looked at Delaro Complete applied at R1. So kind of a really kind of standard fungicide application that you'll see. And we looked at largely the duration of grain fill, and that's just how many days is it taking until we reach maximum kernel dry matter. It's not quite until black layer, but where are we seeing that maximum kernel dry matter, and actually how long is that taking? So the blue line here, the control, that's no fungicide. We didn't have any fungicide, period, on these plots. We did have disease, so we had 8% severity on the ear leaves, largely tar spot and gray leaf spot in these trials. But seeing that just on the ear leaf, 8% severity. If we look at the overall grain fill duration, it was about 56 days. 56 days from about when pollination finished all the way until we reached max dry matter. You can see the number here, 378 milligrams per individual kernel. So we actually looked at the weights, the dry weights of the individual kernels. The orange line is where we had a fungicide. So we applied the fungicide, we had disease control. So you see we're down to about 1.7% severity on that ear leaf. One thing we noticed just walking from plot to plot is a little bit greener, a little bit healthier in those plants. And when those plants were a little bit greener, a little bit healthier, we do see an extension in grain fill, and it's largely just the duration of grain fill. It's pretty rare we can change the rate of grain fill, but it's typically more so the duration of grain fill. So when we had that disease control, we had a little bit healthier canopy in that plant. Our grain fill actually went 61 days. So anywhere from about 4 to 5 days of an extension is what we've seen. This is 2023. 2022 data was very similar for us. But looking at yield, we saw a 10 bushel yield response. 2022, we saw about 15 bushel response. So again, we're seeing that yield response. We're seeing that disease control, but where's that yield coming from? And a lot of it had to do to the weight of the kernels and also the duration of the grain fill and the importance of grain fill duration in corn. And disease management is one piece of that, right? We also see it with nitrogen fertility. Temperature is another piece of that as well, and we're also starting to look at additional fertility, trying to expand upon this question. So I touched on, looking at the importance of fertility and also its influence on yield, but also we've started looking at it in terms of grain fill and kernel weight and corn. This is just some preliminary data we did over the last couple years. We have 3 locations, so West Lafayette, Northeast Indiana, so Columbia City up by Fort Wayne, and then Southeast Indiana and Jennings County here. We had no non-treated control, so we had no fungicide applied here. Then we had fungicide application at R1, so these are field scale research trials. Delaro Complete at R1. So we did have a yield response across the board. We did have disease across the board in these trials. Yield response was anywhere from about 8 to about 20 bushel, depending on the disease severity in those sites. But what was really interesting when we started looking at this data and why we're kind of expanding our trials on this is that we also looked at a fertility component. So just adding that same application of that fungicide, let's mix in some fertility. We largely looked at nitrogen, potassium, boron, and molybdenum for that specific product that we used. And every single location we did see a yield bump with that fertility included with that fungicide. It was anywhere from, I think, 5 to 6 bushel, maybe as low as 4 bushel here. But it was fairly consistent across a lot of these trials, so I think that's what's really interesting. We do have some preliminary data that it's also potentially influencing that grain fill duration a little bit more with that fertility component to it too. But there may be some potential with not only disease control, but also managing some of these nutrients at that tassel timing and also that same application timing as that fungicide.
So just to talk about a few products that we have that can help, let me get turned around. Just some few products. If you start looking there kind of at the data that he was having there, and he's talking about that R1 fungicide pass, you look at one of the products that our partners, Winfield Solution, has, Maxin ZMB Plus, which is a new product that came to market this year for us. Their data is showing there at a quart rate about a 3.8 bushel yield increase, putting it in at the VT timing. So I think that's kind of something to just reiterate some of the data they're seeing that we have from the Winfield as well in some of the products. And then looking at the potassium as well, Maxin K is one of the products that they have. And this is a form of potassium acetate with the Cornsorb technology to help drive more nutrients into the plant with that one and help move it through the plant. So still seeing a base treatment versus the system, you're gaining about 3 to bushel there, and then we get the system plus the Maxin K, we're gaining another 3 or 4 on top of that. So more products, talking about, you're thinking about potassium, how we drive more potassium into the plant. What did they talk about? More potassium you can get in, what? You can take up more nitrogen, right? We can help mitigate stress in that corn plant. So there's a lot of things that potassium can do, so if we can help drive that into the plant. So just to touch on one last thing then, from a product standpoint, we came out with a new product this year that we're working with growers on. A lot of guys are trialing this, so you'll see a lot of data come this winter out of our Superior Foliar Boost is what this product is called here. We had a lot of data from our supplier that we were working with, seeing a lot of positive results. We kind of mimicked the product. We added a few more things that we wanted in it. There's still some other things that I would like to have. If you look at the analysis, it's a 5-11-14 with sulfur, zinc, manganese, copper, boron, and moly. This is a liquid. It's not dry. It is it's derived from potassium acetate. On the potassium side, we also have a fulvic in there to help drive more nutrients into the plant, and the sugar in that fulvic to help take that into that system a little deeper there. So when you look at those things, you look at the rates, the products you can go on, whether that's corn or beans. We're going to focus mainly on corn today here, but you can run a 2 to 8 quart rate on your V5 applications. You can put it in there. It mixes well with the product. You can also look at a 2 to 4 quart rate with the fungicide pass, and that's kind of the data that we were looking at here, that he's seeing some positive results there as well. So there's definitely a higher demand for these micronutrients and your potassium later in the growing season than what they used to talk about years ago. So that's one reason why we're looking at more of these products that can go in that tank when we need them there to drive yield. And then obviously soybeans. If I had to add one more thing to this product, if we could increase the rate of boron, put 6 to 8 ounces of boron, whether that's Maxin boron or boron 10%, I would like to do that. You just can't keep these products suspended in a mix. The boron wants to fall out if you're going to store it for a long period of time. So that's kind of where we're at. So does anybody got any questions? We're down to the last little bit. Any questions for Dan?
It depends on, one, where the disease is at in the canopy and what the severity of it is. There's really nothing we can do to cure what's already there, but we can still, if you're seeing it in the lower portion of the canopy at low levels, if you have adequate conditions like a disease like southern rust and tar spot that can move really quickly, getting that fungicide on in a timely fashion can help slow that down. The other challenge with that is that these fungicides, you get some activity for a period of time and simply 2 to 3, maybe 3 weeks with the best products, and then it might start picking up again. So it's just trying to keep a activity and suppressing that disease, but there's not much we can do to actually cure that disease.
Better off just prevent it from the start then?
Yeah.
And can you get out there too early with that fungicide then? I mean,
you can, again, it's kind of back to the economics piece, right? We can spray, and you can spray early and protect it early, and then spray late. If you had every option in the world, but some of the fungicides, right? It's just back to the activity that we worry about. So if we spray, and we don't have any disease out there, we spray. Then we just don't have the conditions conducive for disease. That fungicide is going to then run out of activity, and I don't want you to get into an area where you're running out of activity with that early application. Then the disease is showing up, and then it's starting to kind of ramp up. So it's that question, that the timing of fungicide is really tricky. It shifts every single year. You have to be really timely in it, and really pay attention to that disease to try and time it correctly. But it is a tricky question. Yeah.
Yeah, so from a standpoint of diseases, I think you guys seen a video that I sent out. We sent out the 1st August. We started seeing southern rust probably about the 24th, 5th of July, starting to hit. That is probably, so from an early standpoint, we've seen a lot of gray leaf spot, northern corn leaf blight early on, and there was a lot of it this year. Physoderma is heavy. We got heavy Physoderma. Those are kind of some earlier season ones. The Physoderma is still probably haunting us out here in the fields today. If you look at all the black spots on some of it, you'll see the Physoderma, and we are getting a little node breakage going on out there. But the big monster in the room probably becomes southern rust. And southern rust is the one today that we are seeing a lot in the lower canopy and all the way to the top of the plant already, depending on your level of protection and your variety that has resistance and level of resistance that you have to southern rust based on your variety. Some of them have good southern rust gene or tolerance to southern rust. So yes, we do have a fair amount of disease. Talk to your sales guys about applications and how we kind of keep that at bay on some of them. So late corn is going to be the big fungicide bang that you have to protect yet.